I work at an amusement park. Only half the monsters here are paid actors. Written by Girl from the Crypt. I should start off by explaining a couple of things. Our park doesn't focus on one specific theme. We have 4 sections that are fenced off from one another. There's a spooky one, a western one, an old-timey Hollywood one, and one that looks like everything there is made of candy. We get a lot of visitors, mostly families and young couples. Every single one of us actors, the actual actors, is assigned to a specific one of the other things, the ones that aren't actors but pretend to be. Now you might be wondering why a park would keep around non-human creatures that pose a potential threat to its visitors, and of course you'd have to ask management for an exact answer. My best guess, however, is that they are in fact good employees. They don't need to be paid, look extremely real, and offer a way more authentic experience. Of course, the experience cannot be too authentic, if you catch my drift. That's what we, the actual actors, are here for. Every section has 2 actors and 2 of the other ones. We don't have a specific name for them, but we refer to them as pretenders, not actors, or monsters most of the time. Our main objective is to keep the one we're assigned to under control. Make it seem like they're actors too, not strange beings we don't even know the origin of. Take my monster as an example. I work at a horror themed section. That means my territory are the 2 fun houses, the larger of which is a hospital themed, the indoor roller coaster, and that other really cool outdoor one that winds around a gigantic skull. The roller coaster goes in through its mouth, comes out of one eye hole, and goes back in through the other. It's some genius design, really. I spend my day walking around in my costume, either chasing the visitors with my whip, which for clarification is part of my role, or leading it around by its chain that is attached to the iron collar around its neck. God help us if that thing ever comes off. The one I have been assigned to is tall, broad, and has black, surprisingly fluffy fur, a round flat face, and 2 big ram horns on top of its head. Its eyes are 2 large red buttons, and its mouth holds a set of long, shiny, sharp fangs. Its tongue usually hangs out of its maw, black drool dripping down from it constantly. Its name is Mr. Scratch, on account of its oversized claws, but I call it the sock puppet. Mr. Scratch is quite obviously a costume. He moves sluggishly, and there are even seams and stitchings to be seen in some places. The costume itself, however, is a living, breathing thing. You wouldn't know if you'd just seen it walk around by my side. I, however, found out pretty soon, on my first day actually. When they told me they had given me the acting job because of my physical strength, and that they needed me to take care of a monster of sorts, I was dumbfounded. Then again, my job interview had included questions like, would you consider yourself as relatively fearless? And if you were to get attacked by a wild animal, would you A. fend it off, B. run for your life and call for help, or C. hide? So the warning signs were there, but of course my first reaction was disbelief, which by the way was replaced with stern cold realization in record time on the day I started working my acting job. My manager, Dale, a grumpy, douchey guy in his late 20s, had me dress up in the costume I have been wearing nearly every day for 3 years now. It's hard to describe, kind of like a goth monster hunter outfit which comes with a whip, but it looks really fancy and is agreeably comfortable. He had then led me to a large cage in the horror-themed section. It was standing next to the bigger funhouse. Its door was held shut by a chain with an oversized lock on it. The sign above it read, "Mr. Scratch," in big twisted red letters. Dale unloaded a large plastic bag he had been carrying from his shoulder and threw it onto the ground in front of me. "You'll find a lamb shank and the metal leash in there," he said curtly, nodding at the bag. "A lamb shank?" I inquired. Dale gave me a sleazy yellow-teethed grin. "We found it likes lamb," he replied, as if that explained anything at all. He took out a small key from his pocket and walked over to the cage. "I'll let it out for you, but just this once, so you can tame it. Once you've gotten that over with, I'll give you the key. Won't be wasting any more of my time doing your job then." Part of me still thought he was messing with me, but I was beginning to have my doubts. He proceeded towards the cage and turned his key inside the lock. The door sprang open with a creaking noise and Dale stepped aside. At first nothing happened. Then from the part of the cage that had not yet been reached by the sparse early morning sunlight, the thing they called Mr. Scratch emerged. It exited the cage at a slow, menacing pace on all fours. But once it was outside, it rose to its hind legs and raised its head, slowly opening its mouth, only for its long, gooey tongue to drop out. I stared at the moving costume, then at Dale. I was very close to losing my composure. "Are you kidding?" I asked. "Tell that idiot in the costume to cut the crap. If you guys think you can mess with the new one..." But the look on Dale's face was serious. He almost seemed a bit frightened. "Feed it," he hissed. "Feed it and then put on the leash." I shook my head and rolled my eyes, but decided to play along. I bent down, picked up the plastic bag, produced a large lamb shank from inside and waved it at the moving costume. "Come and get it," I sang, feeling immensely stupid for talking to a person like I would a dog. The thing came bounding towards me at a surprising speed and ripped the shank out of my hand. When it sank its teeth naturally into the meat and I watched the creature tear it to shreds and gobble it down, I realised that I was not looking at a person in a costume. Gripped by a sudden boldness, I slowly took a few steps towards it, reached out and let my palm travel over its shiny black fur. It was warm. I could feel its chest rise and fall and the muscles underneath its skin pulsing, moving. I was staring at the thing with wide eyes, not believing what I was seeing. Finally, I sprang back into action and picked up the leash from the bag. I attached it to the metal choker and after making sure I had a good grip on it, gave it an experimental tug. The beast's head jerked towards me and I stumbled backwards in shock, but quickly managed to regain my footing. Luckily, the thing still seemed to be more interested in its meal than in me. Dale came strolling over and gave me a pat on the shoulder, which for the record is the only friendly gesture I've ever gotten from him. He handed me the key for Mr. Scratch's cage and told me to make sure not to lose it. I later asked him jokingly if the creature had ever attacked any of its other caretakers, to which he let out a loud laugh before answering in a suddenly quite serious tone, "No, with one exception." "Being?" I offered. Dale laughed once again before adding, "Just the guy before you. He was good at his job, but we had to let him go. You can't be the monster tamer if both your legs are missing." Upon seeing my startled expression, he smirked and told me not to let it get to me. He was sure Mr. Scratch liked me better. He's most certainly not reading this, so I feel safe here when I say Dale's an asshole. In regards to the monster, I've already mentioned that I've taken to calling him the sock puppet. After reading my description of him, I bet you can see where I'm coming from. The sock puppet and I are on pretty good terms, by the way. He's never really caused me any problems. I usually walk him around the park and sometimes let him dash forward to jump scare a visitor, only to then pull him back and hiss at the visitor not to get too close to him. That's our favourite trick. He's run off on me twice before, but those are stories for another day. All in all, Mr. Scratch and I get along pretty well. Too bad you can't say that about some of the other actors and their pretenders. When talking about my co-workers, I guess it only makes sense to start with the one who works in the same part of the park as me. That would be Darius. He's very nice, but easily stressed. He talks a lot about wanting another job, but either that's just an empty phrase of his or he hasn't found one, because he's still around after 3 years of me working here. I met him on my second day of the job. Of course, Dale had failed to introduce me to any of my colleagues. He had simply given me a short overview about who I was yet to meet and what I was to expect. He hadn't put very much effort into his explanation. I was on my way to Mr. Scratch's cage in the early morning, about half an hour before the park's opening time that day. I was already dressed up and ready to release the sock puppet, carrying with me the metal leash and a bag of dog treats, both of which I dropped when I collided with the man in the doctor's outfit, who had come seemingly out of nowhere. By his fake blood-smeared lab coat and the surgical face mask dangling around his neck, I determined him to be another actor. Hey, I'm Darius. You must be the new tamer, he stammered, and without giving me time to answer, added, I really need your help right now. Okay, I responded, taken aback. What's going on? Did Dale already tell you about them? He asked, and I nodded. He seemed relieved. Oh, thank God. Okay, so I have to watch out for one myself. She's like a zombie nurse. Hard to describe, but you'll know when you see her. Either way, we can't really put her on a leash like Scratch, so we let her roam around this part of the park freely. Under my supervision, of course. But I kind of lost track of her, and now I don't know where she is. We can't have her stroll around the kid-friendly sections, or the visitors will freak out. You've got to help me, please. We don't have much time. I abandoned the leash and dog treats, and the two of us got on our way. Darius told me he had already looked for her in our section, so she had to be in one of the others. Our first guess was the Hollywood one, since it was pretty much right next to ours. While we did not find her there, Darius made use of our time by informing me about the workings of the park in a bit more detail. All the not actors are put into cages overnight to keep them from wandering about. Half an hour before opening time, they're being let out. He also told me a few bits about some of the other monsters, but said it would be best for me to find out myself. We didn't pass any on our way through the Hollywood section, but we did find the nurse. She was standing next to a food booth, the owner of which thankfully had not arrived yet. She had her back turned to us and was swaying slightly. Her thigh-length nurse costume was smeared with red stains, not unlike that of Darius's, but something told me that no fake blood had been used on hers. Thank God, there she is, Darius muttered. Dale would have killed me. What now? I asked. I'll just walk her back to our section. It's as easy as that, he explained. She's basically brain dead. I watched as he approached her, grabbed her by the shoulders and turned her around. I nearly gagged upon seeing her face. Half of the lower portion of her jaw was missing. The other half was dangling loosely off her head. Blood was steadily dripping from her tongue, reminding me of that of Mr. Scratch. She was completely unresponsive, her eyes staring past me and Darius into the distance. If she knew we were there, she wasn't letting it on. I followed Darius, who was leading the nurse by his shoulders, back to the entrance of the horror-themed section. There is still 10 minutes left before the park would let in visitors. Upon realising this, I hurried to release the sock puppet from his cage and put on its leash. And that was that, basically. The sight of the undead nurse may have grossed me out for a little while, but I learned pretty soon that she wasn't the kind that I needed to fear. There are some much worse things in the park than her. Working at an amusement park, The Laughing Cowboy and the Sugar Plum Fairy. Written by Girl from the Crypt. Those who have read my first post will know that half of the actors at the amusement park I work at aren't really actors. We call them pretenders, not actors, or monsters, plain and simple. Also, just saying, I had some trouble thinking of a shorter and less misleading title this time. I get it, I had it coming, but the joke about the unpaid actors got old really fast. It appears I have to preface this one by answering some frequently asked questions regarding Mr. Scratch. Yes, I do give him scratches and belly rubs and all that stuff from time to time. I often find myself treating him like my pet, even though I really shouldn't be doing that. Due to his size and strength, I have not yet attempted to play or wrestle with him, nor do I wish to try anytime soon. About his anatomy, I guess I could have made myself more clear. Imagine a huge, detailed costume as it would be worn by an actor in a theme park. Now imagine the costume as an animal. The outer layer is made of fabric and the fur is artificial, but there's a whole bunch of functioning organs, blood and muscle tissue inside. It's a costume and it's a living, breathing thing, and it does defecate, and for some reason a lot of you wanted to know that. They clean out his cage once a day when I'm out walking him about. I also mentioned him running off before. He only did it twice, and to be honest, it wasn't that big of a deal. The first time it was actually my fault. My hands had grown sweaty from having held the leash for so long, and he was in a bit of a funky mood that day. So when he gave the chain one hard, strong pull, I lost my grip on it and it flew out of my hand. He didn't get very far either. I'm a fast runner, and he only managed to make it to one of the ice cream parlours before I caught up to him. I got my hands back on the leash just as Dale, my manager, came running up to me. Upon noticing I had gotten the sock puppet back under control, he let out a sigh and muttered, "Close shave, idiot," under his breath as he passed me. I don't want to talk about the second time he ran off. It was nasty, and the only way I sleep soundly at night is knowing that it wasn't my fault. All in all, the sock puppet barely acts up. Unlike some of the others, you would think that the worst not actors are from our part of the park, the horror section. But while the undead nurse and Mr. Scratch might be the more creepy looking ones, the pretenders one should actually be afraid of, and not under mine or Darius's care. And that is what leads us to the neighbouring section. The amusement park I work at might not be the biggest, but it is not modest by any means. This is proven by the most flashy and beautiful section, the Wild West one, or as we call it, Twin Vale Point. This name is painted in large black letters onto the wooden sign welcoming visitors into the Western style town. You'll find the most gorgeous old-fashioned wood roller coaster in there. It's my personal favourite, and I'm guilty of sneaking rides on it during my break times when there aren't as many visitors around. Other than that, I make it a point not to go too close to the Twin Veil Point at any time. The setup is quite beautiful and a refreshing contrast to the grim, dark black and grey colours that I'm usually surrounded by when working in my own ghost town. But the western section also happens to be home to one of the pretenders that really freaked me out. The Laughing Cowboy. Technically, I should not be able to encounter him as often as I do. Twin Veil Point is a bit farther away from the horror section, but somehow, and don't ask me why, our paths keep crossing anyway. The first time I met him was when I was already 1 month into the job. By then I had gotten used to the way things work around here and had come to enjoy my daily walks with Mr. Scratch. But I had also learnt that it is important to give him a bit of a break from time to time. It was a particularly busy day and the park was bustling with visitors. I had been walking the sock puppet around for about 3 hours straight and had noticed him getting a bit tired, so I brought him back to his cage. It had been newly cleaned and padded out with some fresh hay. He seemed very relieved and happily marched inside once I let him off his leash. I locked the door behind him before making my way back to the main plaza where I would often walk about. Now, you need to know that during seasons in which we expect a lot of visitors, us actors carry around walkie-talkies in case something happens and we need to inform the others. They aren't management issued. Dale could not give less of a damn about it if we had a hard time or not. Someday an actor just came up with the idea and bought a bunch of them. So it was one of those busy seasons and I had just arrived on the plaza when I heard my portable radio come crackling to life. I quickly walked over to a deserted corner behind a booth and pulled it from where I had it tucked into my waistband. Hello? Hi? Anyone from the horror section? Guys, I need someone from the horror section. Come in, please. Hurry! Raising the speaker to my mouth, I responded. Horror section speaking, what's the matter? The distorted voice on the other end stayed silent for a little while before finally answering. Oh, I get it. You must be the new tamer. Are you with Mr. Scratch right now? No, he's in his cage. What's the matter? Okay, so I hope I'm not overwhelming you with this, but I'm gonna need you to help me with something here. It's, urgent. This is Mitchell from Twin Veil Point speaking. The not actor I'm assigned to just ran off. I lost sight of him and I can't find him anywhere. I think he's in your section. Shoot. Okay man, what's he look like? Mitchell cleared his throat. Cowboy attire, you know. Large hat, leather vest, chaps and boots, cleft lip and black teeth. Any idea where he might be at? I asked. Yes, actually. He's run off into your break room once or twice before. I don't know, maybe he likes it or something, but chances are he's in there. I sighed. Got it. I'll check it out. In case I find him, can you wait for me by the entrance? Will do. See you then. Oh, wait, one more thing. He doesn't talk, but he laughs an awful lot. Don't let it get you. He only wants to creep you out. Alright, I'll remember that. After this rather bizarre conversation, I instantly set out for the break room. The one in our part of the park is not very large, but it offers a space for Darius and me to change clothes, a table we sometimes eat at, as well as a small bathroom with merely a sink and a toilet. Upon entering the room, I immediately spotted him. A man in a cowboy hat was sitting at our table with his back turned to me. I cleared my throat. Hello? I was really trying to sound confident, but something about the way he was sitting perfectly still and the strange silence that hung in the air just made my skin crawl. "You're going to have to return to Mitchell," I said firmly, hoping the pretender would not notice the slight quiver in my voice. "You don't belong here. Now, get moving." No reply. Instead, the cowboy's shoulders began to shake slightly. "Dude, you're starting to get on my nerves. Get up and walk your ass back to the western section. This instant," I ordered, taking a few slow, careful steps towards him. In response, the quivering of his shoulders grew stronger. "You hear me? Come on. Please, I need to get back to work." I walked just a little bit closer and hesitantly reached out to touch his back. The second my hand made contact with the leather of his vest, his head suddenly jerked back. He didn't turn around, he just threw his head back and stared up at me with wide eyes. I instantly backed away blindly, unable to break his gaze. His mouth opened, stretching into a wide, eerie smile, and I saw that his teeth were completely black, just like Mitchell had told me. I remember absent-mindedly taking notice of the cleft in his upper lip as well. A low rumbling chuckle erupted from his throat. The cowboy slowly stood up, his neck still bent backwards so he could keep looking at me. It was a grotesque sight. Finally, he turned around, cackling loudly. He straightened his hat and proceeded towards me, holding out his hand. I stared at him, hesitant to take it, but eventually relented. His palm felt cold and clammy. "Yeah, nice to meet you. Are you gonna get going now?" I stammered, unsure of what to say. His laughter had faded and he was now regarding me with a strange, void smirk on his face. He didn't let go of my hand. When I tried to pull it away from him, his grip strengthened. I could feel my heart beating faster and faster in my chest. The cowboy was simply standing there, holding my hand and grinning at me with his black teeth. I didn't know what to do. Trying not to look scared, I watched as droplets of equally black saliva formed on his lower lip. They soon grew and began running down his chin in tiny streams. I felt some of them land on my own hand, which he was still squeezing painfully hard. A wave of relief washed over me when he let go of my hand. He then reached up to his collar and began unbuttoning his shirt. I quickly took a few steps backwards, raising my hand. "What are you—" "Oh no, man, keep that on," I ordered. I did not like where this was going. To my surprise, he actually listened this time. He stopped and instead peeled back one side of the shirt, allowing me to see part of his upper body. There were 3 bullet holes in his chest. The skin around them was frayed, and the flesh in the holes themselves grey and dark. It looked rotten. I gagged slightly and turned my head. I could hear him start to giggle again. His snickering grew into a fit of laughter, and when I dared to look at him again, he had buttoned up his shirt and was doubling over. I merely stood there, watching in disbelief at his eerie, throaty cackle seemed to echo off the walls of the empty break room. Suddenly the door was thrown open and light flooded the rather dimly lit space. There was a man standing in the doorway. He was dressed like a sheriff out of an old Wild West movie. The cowboy's smile instantly faded from his face when he turned to look at the sheriff, visibly disappointed. The man dashed forward and grabbed the cowboy by the collar, pulling him away from me. "Here I am, turning my back to you for one damn second, and the next thing I know, you're off to harass the new employee," he grunted as he flung him aside. The cowboy quickly regained his footing and looked up at his attacker with narrowed, hateful eyes. The sheriff introduced himself to me as Mitchell, and I accompanied him back to the entrance to Twinvale Point, where we said our goodbyes. Mitchell had kept a firm grip on the not actor's upper arm the whole time. It reminded me of a parents angrily dragging their misbehaving child along. He told me a couple of things about the cowboy on our way. Due to his humanoid appearance, he could not be led around on a leash, so Mitchell had to observe his every move and keep him from wandering off the boundaries of Twinvale Point. Usually he wouldn't cause too many problems, but from time to time he would become a little adventurous. Maybe it was just to annoy Mitchell. Either way, every time he'd get into that mood, he would run off and pull a prank or get up to some other trouble. I don't think he cares what it is he does, as long as it gets on my nerves, he said, side glancing at the pretender, who was begrudgingly walking along beside him. I wouldn't say that the laughing cowboy is the monster I am most scared of. What I find so unnerving about him is that he keeps me in a limbo of trying to decide if he is a threat to me or not. He acts all cute around the visitors, always pauses to take photos with them and posing and stuff. The only time he gets disturbing like that is when one is left alone with him. Plus, I'm not sure if he really means to do any harm or if he just wants to mess with people. There have been instances of him being quite nice to me. One time he even almost saved my life in a way. Since I was already talking about the not actors that scare me, I believe it's time I told you about the Sugar Plum Fairy. The Sugar Plum Fairy is one of the monsters from the candy themed section. Of course, it's directed mainly at really small children. Not unlike the cowboy, the fairy does not cause a lot of trouble most of the time. Except for when she does, she makes a way bigger mess. She has the general appearance of a very short woman in a tutu. She wears a bunch of cute accessories in her hair that look like candy. She spends all day ballet dancing on a small stage in the candy section. She never stops moving. But every night when the park closes down and the monsters are brought into their overnight shelters, she goes absolutely berserk. Sure, I can understand she doesn't want to be locked in a cage, but who knows what she would get up to with no one around to watch out for her. The person assigned to her is Maxine. She's a very nice girl and we get along really well. She's dressed up as a princess and loves nothing more than taking pictures with the visitors. She spends her time hanging around the plaza in the candy section, watching out for the Sugar Plum Fairy. While the fairy never acts up when there's still visitors around, she sure doesn't hold back when we're the only ones left in the park. This results in Maxine often needing assistance in catching her and locking her up at night time. That one night I had just taken Mr. Scratch to his cage. Maxine radioed for me to come over. Most of the other actors had not quite finished up their work yet and were still busy taking care of their own assigned pretenders. So I had to go and help her catch the fairy. I made my way over to the candy section where Maxine was waiting for me. She had already changed out of her costume and into her normal everyday clothes. She hurriedly explained to me that the Sugar Plum Fairy had run off when she had entered the stage to take her back to the small trailer she spends the night in, and was now roaming this part of the park. We split up to go look for her, and I admit I was more than just a little nervous. The Sugar Plum Fairy doesn't even show her real face to the visitors. She keeps it hidden under that thing, that mask, which looks like a face but it isn't. It's hard to describe. So I went down to the booths to look for her. It wasn't the first time I had encountered her, so I knew what to expect. But when I found her sitting on the roof of one of the closed food stands facing me, I nearly got a heart attack. After I had caught my breath again, I carefully continued to approach her. "Hey," I said softly. I had learned early on that it's best not to anger her. "Would you please come down here?" I reached up and held out my hand for her to help her jump off. "Please? For me?" I breathed a sigh of relief when she placed her tiny hand in mine. Moments later, she landed gracefully on the ground on her tiptoes. No idea how she does that, by the way. She let go of my hand, and for a moment we just looked at each other, smiling. Then her eyes suddenly rolled back into her head as she reached up and pinched the skin on her neck between her fingers and slowly peeled it off all the way up to her forehead, nearly stripping her entire head of its skin and revealing what I already knew was underneath. The true face of the sugar plum fairy consists entirely of one large, razor-sharp beak, not unlike that of a kraken. She opened it wide, hissing and snarling at me. I stumbled backwards, not sure of what to do. My hand reached for the whip on my waistband, my only means of self-defense, only to remember I had already changed out of my costume. I continued to back away, the sugar plum fairy slowly and menacingly proceeding towards me on her tiptoes. I screamed for Maxine to help me, knowing full well it was useless. By the time she'd find me, the monster would have probably already managed to take a good chunk out of my arm or something. My only option I had left was to run. I think I mentioned previously that I am quite fast, but apparently the sugar plum fairy is faster. She came bounding after me in long, graceful leaps, sometimes stopping to twirl or hop in place. It must have looked funny from an outside perspective. Still, she effortlessly managed to catch up with me and block my path. Her tiny hands pushed me to the ground with a strength betraying her small, delicate frame. I felt her step on my stomach, painfully pushing the tip of her foot into my soft flesh. Then all of a sudden, she pulled back. I hadn't seen or heard him coming, yet when I looked up, the cleft-lipped cowboy from Twinbell Point was standing over me. The look on his face was stern, and he had placed one of his hands on the fairy's shoulder. She hissed at him and snapped her beak into his direction a couple of times, but he remained unfazed. He just took her by the arm and calmly walked off with her. I pushed myself off the ground and followed them. He led her to her trailer, opened the door and helped her climb inside before closing the latches and locking her in. I watched in disbelief as he tipped his hat at me before wandering off to the Wild West section. I thought I could hear Mitchell shout something along the lines of, "Where the hell were you?" in the distance. All in all, I think the Sugar Plum Fairy might be the one that creeps me out the most. The cowboy is a close second, but just because he's so unpredictable. Then again, there's so many of them to choose from, and each pretender just hits another nerve with me, so I really can't tell for sure.